Welcome to this week's Iraq Briefing, where we discuss the top stories shaping Iraq today. I'm Erik Gustafson.
And I am Omar Nidawi.
Today's main topic, will U.S. tariffs sink Baghdad's economy? We're going to discuss three major developments in Iraq this week. Iran-backed militias claim they'll disarm, but is it credible? The fallout from the new U.S. tariffs, and Baghdad just signed two massive energy deals with American companies. Omar, take us in.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, we have some big news this week, and one of them is a report about some of the most aggressive Iran-backed militias in Iraq being ready to disarm. That's what the reports coming in from Reuters said. Based on conversations with several commanders of these groups and with senior Iraqi officials, the report says that these militias have been basically shaken by the threats that Washington has sent to Baghdad informally about the need to disarm these militias or face the potential of punitive military strikes. And according to the report, the militias are taking the threat seriously and are now open to negotiations with the Iraqi government to lay down their weapons. The four militias specifically mentioned in the report are Kataib Hezbollah, Harakat Hezbollah Nujaba, Ansar Allah al-Awfiya, and Kataib Sayyid al-Shuhada. And these are basically the core of what is known as the Islamic resistance in Iraq. That's the umbrella group that has been responsible for a lot of the attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and really in Syria and even Jordan, as well as attacks on Israel in the past. According to the report, the militias are again taking this seriously, and they have also received a green light from their sponsors in the IRGC, that's Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, to take whatever necessary decisions in order to avoid a military escalation with the United States. And according to some Iraqi officials cited in the report, the talks between the militias and the Iraqi prime minister have reached an advanced stage. But of course, there's not enough detail about what that actually means in reality.
So, given their history, how credible is these reports that they might potentially disarm?
Well, that's a very good question. It's very difficult to determine, to ascertain the credibility of this. First, because the militias themselves, Kataib Hezbollah at least, they have denied the reports. They have said that this is baseless and does not reflect our position. Also, verifiability is going to be very difficult, even if the report is credible. The militias could be playing for time. They could be trying to use plausible deniability. Militias in the past have used front groups to disguise the trail of their operations. Every now and then, there would be a new title, a new group that pops up, claims responsibility for a few attacks, and then disappears. So it will be difficult to know for sure that a militia has really given up their weapons. Also, there's a question of what does this really mean in reality? These groups are part of the PMF, of the Popular Mobilization Forces. So does this mean the complete disbandment of the PMF or simply just these groups? What happens to other groups that have conducted attacks against the US? What about Asa'ib Ahl al-Haq? So a lot of details really to be worked out here before we can take this as a credible development.
Yeah, certainly. Of course, it would be very welcome news if this actually happens, but it was just last week that we talked about these militias, which are part of the government. They're entrenched with political parties, passing new laws, including establishing their own military academy. So they don't seem to be going anywhere. They seem to continue to entrench themselves within the power structures of Iraq. So yeah, it's a question of what does disarmament really mean? So Omar, let's now pivot to those two big energy deals with American companies.
Okay, so these are actually preliminary deals, memorandums of understanding rather than actual commercial contracts, but they are quite significant. There was a commercial delegation from the US that visited Iraq this week, and the representatives of two energy companies, one of them is a subsidiary of GE, the other is called UGT Renewables. They signed these two agreements with with the GE subsidiary. It's a deal to install 24,000 megawatts, 24 gigawatts of combined cycle gas-fired power plants across Iraq. And this is huge. It's almost double what the installed capacity that exists in Iraq today. And with the other company, it's a smaller amount. It's a 3 gigawatts, 3,000 megawatts, but it's renewables. This is a massive integrated solar power plant and also a lot of battery storage capacity, enough to store 500 megawatt hours of electricity. So this could basically double the size of Iraq's, almost double the size of Iraq's power generation capacity.
Well, I mean that's significant because right now there's so many outages, right? So it's not meeting current demand. So that this would be a game changer. I suspect that Baghdad's going to need stable revenue to pay for these projects. If these trade tensions with the US spiral, Iraq's budget, of course, already stretched with what, like $70 barrel oil, would crumble. How's Baghdad responding to the Trump tariffs, and what's at stake if this escalates?
Yeah, that's a good question. Baghdad is really rattled by the announcement of tariffs. The US last week imposed 39% tariffs on Iraqi imports. Prime Minister Sudani brought together his trade and economic advisors, and they, looked at the numbers, and they determined, just like everyone else, that the tariffs are not really based on tariffs that Iraq imposes on US goods, but rather on the trade deficit between Iraq and the US. And it's basically the fact that Iraq sells a lot of crude oil to the United States to the tune of $8 or $9 billion each year, creating a deficit for the US of nearly $6 billion. So Iraq is also noticing that much of the US products that enter the Iraqi market actually come through third-party countries. I think part of that is American cars manufactured in other countries. So Baghdad is very worried about this, and also very worried about what US tariffs mean for the global economy. Oil has already dropped to $60 and maybe pointing even lower. And like you said, Iraq's budget is based on, with all its deficit, is based on an oil price of $70 per barrel. So Iraq is very concerned about this causing a massive disruption to its economy and its ability to meet its obligations. So the Prime Minister gave a number of instructions to government agencies to try and address this trade imbalance. First, by trying to create direct commerce between Iraq and the US to cut out the third parties. Iraq also wants to create more direct links between Iraqi banks and US banks so that commerce could be financed directly and help reduce the imbalance. And the government also wants to engage with the US in direct talks to basically review the foundations of, or the basic components of US-Iraq trade, and to find ways to address the imbalance in ways that are mutually beneficial to both countries.
Well, that definitely sounds like positive developments. I mean, I think a lot of economists are still scratching their heads about why trade deficit is such a big issue, because you're always going to have trade deficits with global trade. But yeah, more direct commerce, I think that would be a benefit. But I'm just going back to the fact that all of these tariffs, of course, are driving down oil prices, and thinking about the budget and that there's already a deficit. What are the economic risks that we're looking at for Iraq?
Well, I think the biggest risk to Iraq is not being able to pay the operational expenses of its government. And that reads really basically salaries. If Iraq is unable to pay salaries and pensions on time, things can get ugly quickly. And already this week, we're seeing teachers across several of Iraq's provinces striking and protesting, demanding better pay, better benefits, and better working conditions. So imagine this is when the oil prices have just started to come down, and their effects have not even been felt on Iraq's checkbook. Imagine if oil drops to 50 or 40 and stays at that level for the foreseeable future. That can be catastrophic for Iraq and could lead to massive destabilization of Iraq's economy and society, and potentially even the political structure of the country.
Yeah, definitely. So really impacting the stability of the country. So that is it for this week's Iraq briefing. For more analysis, please go to enablingpeace.org. You can actually also check out the latest Isham. We are now at Isham number 489 for a lot more depth about the stories that we've just discussed today. So please like, subscribe, share us with others, and join us next week. We'll also include a link to the last briefing where you can learn more about the issue of the Iran-backed militias in Iraq and how it affects politics in Iraq. Thank you so much for joining us.